The Ember Witch Saga, Book 1, The Lich, Volume 1, Black Tragedy. Prologue: The Mage and the Island. August 8 to August 18, 447 BME. The waves crashed against the ship's hull. With each wave it passed the wood boards it was built from creaked and groaned. The storm, growing in size off in the distance, showed no signs of stopping. Only a teen, Syria, looked off to the ever-growing island she was approaching, thinking of what beautiful and amazing things she would see on her people's homeland. She had been at sea for 2 months and was finally nearing the end of her voyage. However, as she stared up at the massive 200-foot-tall plateau rising out of the ocean, she feared it would be another few days to even weeks before she reached the elven capital. The ship was heading straight toward the cliff face, and Syria couldn't see any place they could dock at. She looked over toward the crew, who were all calm and relaxed, as if it was normal to ram their ship straight into the rocks. She braced herself for the incoming crash as the bow made its way into the rocks, but as the ship made contact, not even a sound echoed out. The rocks slowly disappeared as the ship passed right through them. Syria looked stunned and confused. The crew, however, continued to do their jobs as if they never even noticed the disappearing rocks.
Dumb, I'm so dumb. These are all elven mages. Of course, they have seen this before,
Syria thought to herself. The ship entered into a large open cavern and approached a series of docks, each with varying sizes of ships stationed in a row.
This is a dock? No, it's more like a small port town,
Syria thought as the ship got closer, revealing dozens of buildings on the shore of the cave.
Alright, via cliff we will depart and show you to your guide.
A harsh-toned voice came from behind her. Syria turned to see a night elven standing behind her. Tall, dark skin and hair with 2 white tattoos running down his arms. The man was a giant compared to her, standing nearly 10 feet tall with muscles so great he looked like a bear.
Thank you, sir,
Syria replied, trying not to let the elvish insult get to her. As a half-elven, she had heard that name enough from her parents' traveling companions. Half-breed or impure breed. Syria gathered her bag and waited as the ship docked. She had been walking through dark, barely lit tunnels for hours. Her guide, as she was told, made the journey extremely boring. A thin old man with a white beard and no hair, wearing what seemed to be a robe made of whale skin, hadn't said a single word the entire time. Instead, he just kept a steady pace as they made their way past tunnel, cave, and outcropping. To pass the time, she had been meditating as best as she could while walking. She focused her mind and let her color flow freely.
Don't do that,
the old man said, stopping in his tracks.
Why not?
Syria replied, keeping her color around her.
It attracts beasts and I'm far too old to fight,
he said softly.
Beasts? You couldn't have told me that before we started walking for hours in the dark,
she shot out, the black shadow around her still flowing.
Yes, beasts. Now please silence that power, it's blinding me,
he said, then began walking again. Syria dropped her aura and followed behind. It had been another 3 hours before the man spoke again.
Hide.
He drew a small dagger from his robe as Syria looked around, finding a small rock to sit behind. Just as she did, a massive pair of spiked legs crashed through the tunnel. The old man stabbed at them but made no contact as another 4 legs exited the massive hole they had came through. A giant black and red spider crawled into the tunnel, fangs dripping with venom that seared the floor as if it was acid. The old man conjured a small yellow flame and tossed it toward the spider with no avail, as one of the spiked legs pierced his chest, killing him instantly. Syria stayed there silently as the spider dragged its prey through the hole and disappeared into the darkness, too afraid to move. After another 3 hours of stumbling through the dark and tight passageways, Syria finally made it out of the cave. She exited into an open field that led to a deep and colorful forest. As she stepped out of the cave, she heard a beautiful mix of seabirds and wind with a faint but unmistakable song. She moved forward to listen more intently, and after a moment she pulled a small harp from her bag and began to play along. The song was one that her mother had taught to her as a child. Another minute passed as she played along and movement caught her eyes. A tree that had been standing a few hundred feet from her began to shift and change. The tree began to glow blue as its limbs and roots shifted. After a moment she noticed that it was taking the shape of a humanoid. The green skin, light green and long-bladed hair, single-horned man stepped forward flute in hand and continued to play the song with her.
Hello there, young soul.
The man said in Elvish with a soft and inviting tone once their song had ended.
I wasn't expecting to have company on my hunt. My name is Craig Dawn.
He finished as he put his flute into his cloak. Syria stood there for a moment taking in the man. His singular horn protruding from his forehead spiraling upwards as if two horns had once been there but they twisted together over years.
My name is Syria Wynn. You're an Oki, aren't you?
She asked hesitantly.
Yes, I am. I take it you are not from Sin?
He asked approaching her.
No, I'm from the mainland. My mother was sent there 20 years ago on a pilgrimage.
She answered.
Ah, I see. Well, welcome home. I am on a hunt and could actually use your help tracking the beast. Are you trained in combat?
He asked.
I learned the basics, but my color is more suited to healing.
She replied.
I see. Well, in any case your help would be much appreciated.
He said, and Syria thought about it for a moment then agreed on one condition.
You must take me to Solvach.
He agreed. Then the two began their trek through the forest. The two had been tracking for 3 days before they found the beast. A giant bird-like creature with vibrant yellows and blues coating its feathers. Kriya used his natural ability to form his arm into a bow and knocked an arrow and loosed it at the beast as Syria used her color to amplify the speed of the arrow. The beast rampaged as the arrow sunk into its flesh, causing blood to drain from the wound. It spread its wings out and let out a massive wail of pain and anger. It thrashed around trying to hit the two elven hunters but was unsuccessful as both Kriya and Syria leaped out of the way. Sending another arrow deep into the beast, Kriya jumped into the air and cast a blue dart of energy at the beast's head. It plunged into the skull but didn't kill the beast, instead sending it flying back into a tree. Syria took the opportunity to use her energy and flung a small black fireball at the creature. It struck the feathers and burned the skin on its underbelly. The beast stood up and screamed at the two. From its mouth a massive tiny needle like darts shot out and struck Kriya, who fell to the ground in a heap. Syria, now alone in the fight, standing against a beast 3 times her size, gathered her strength and launched another black fireball at the creature. It struck its head just before another mass of needles could be launched. The beast reared back and prepared for another shot. It opened its mouth and a cloud of green smog formed. Seeing the green smoke, Syria launched another fireball into its mouth. The black fire erupted into an explosion that tore the beast's head clear off its body. Syria, stunned, could only watch as the beast's body collapsed headless to the ground. After regaining her composure, she ran to Kriya, who was unconscious on the forest's floor. She pressed her hand to his chest and let her color flow through him. After a moment he stirred and began to speak.
You saved me?
He asked, staring up at the young woman.
Thank you. I'm in your debt.
He finished and fell back into unconsciousness. After 3 days of rest, the two were back on the road heading toward the capital city of Sin's Garden. Along the way they ran into several more beasts and creatures. They fought long and hard battles, gathering the meats and supplies of each kill. After a week of travel they were camping at a small river that flowed gently and peacefully through the forest. Kriya was standing completely still, resting in his tree form, when suddenly he transformed back and jumped at Syria, pushing her to the floor. Forming his right arm into a blade and his left into a small shield, he pressed his weight into her.
Stay down,
he said as he stood up and ran into the trees. After fearing for her life from the sudden attack, she sat up in a daze and began to feel massive surges of power flowing through the forest. She walked silently toward the energy and crouched down once she saw what was happening. Kriya was surrounded by 6 other Noki, each glowing a different color, wielding blades, bows, axes, and even a staff.
You have run for far too long, Kriya. It is time to face your death.
one of the Noki said. A male of large stature stepped forward and began the attack. He swung his axe down hard and Kriya dodged. The man swung again and again. Kriya dodged the attack. Using the shield arm he bashed the man in the face, then swung his sword arm, cutting the attacker's head clean off. Another one stepped forward and began an attack, and quickly she was cut down. The battle raged as each of the attackers took their turn. Some landing blows on Kriya, others dying before they had the chance to make a second attack. Finally it was down to a one-on-one fight. Kriya, injured with a sticky yellowish liquid draining from his wounds, took a step forward, ducked under a swing, then stabbed at the attacker. In a move Syria couldn't even see the attacker, stepped back from the swing and flung a huge fireball into Kriya, who flew back and hit the ground hard. He stood up and returned the attack with his own blue fireball. The attacker scrambled out of the way, then shot out his arms, stretching them like vines, and wrapped them around Kriya. The man squeezed around Kriya and after a moment dropped his body to the ground. In horror Syria screamed. The man, now aware of the young girl who had been silently hiding behind a rock, moved forward.
Come on out, young lady. The fight is over and I really don't want to have to chase you down,
he said, and Syria did as he asked. She stood up and walked slowly to the man.
I was sent here from the mainland to be trained in the Solvat Royal Academy.
She stammered out in fear.
I didn't know he was a criminal. Please don't kill me.
She continued, even more afraid of the man now that she had a better look at him. His red color glowed around him, making his deep green skin look like it was covered in blood.
I'm not going to kill you, but I do have questions for you,
he said, reforming his hands as they stretched their way back from Kriya's body. As he approached her, a green blade stabbed through the man's chest and that same yellowish liquid drained from the hole. The man in surprise dropped to the ground and tried to speak, but was silenced as the blade exited his stomach and sliced off his head. Syria looked up from the body in horror and surprise as she saw Kriya standing there, injured but alive. All around her the bodies of the dead Noki began to form into trees, the roots burrowing deep into the ground and the branches stretching out. Syria began to cry as the world around her changed in a display of colors and energy.